for having me here. I was just walking down the hall and I saw this poster. Had you planned to be a planner? Well, when I was 2 years old, my father walked up to me and said, Rollin, what do you want to be? And I said, Dad, I want to be a planner. The answer to this question is no. I became a planner because when in Canada you go to grade 12 or grade 13. If you're going on to university, you go to grade 13. So I went to grade 13, and about the third month of school, you get this form. You get 3 choices. This is your life. 3 choices to apply to any university in Canada. And at that point, you're sitting there thinking, what do I want to be? There's no filling here for astronaut, race car driver, or pimp. And because none of those choices were there, I had to think of something. And I had just been out in Vancouver running the All Canadian Cross Country Championships. My dad knew a guy out there who was a planner. And this guy in can't tell you that age, you know how old I am. But anyway, at the time, this guy was making 65 Gs a year. I thought, hey, I want to make 65 Gs a year. And I'm not good in math, so I'm going to be a planner. So I enrolled in planning school. And I didn't know you had to do statistics in planning school. I didn't know you had to do computer in planning school. And keep in mind that when I did computer, you did it on card punch machines. And when you were finished with your assignments, you could take those beautiful cards and spray paint them gold and turn them into beautiful Christmas trees, which every member of your family had one for Christmas. So that's how I became a planner. I wasn't good in math, I liked geography, and now I'm a planner. When I graduated, there weren't much jobs, there was a recession. I got a student job in the city of Toronto, making a grand total of $200 a week, supporting myself in 2 motor vehicles. And I thought this was great. As a matter of fact, I was probably saving more money then than I'm making now. Then I got a raise to $225. I lied and said I was going back to school in the fall so I could qualify as a student. And I just kept working there. Finally, they hired me full time. So I've been there now for a little while. And about 10 years, actually. I get 4 weeks vacation. And paid sick leave. It's got all the benefits. And I'm now a planner. So what I'm going to show you tonight, I don't want to bore you to death, so I'm going to show you slides in Toronto. Now, I happen to think that the best way to learn is through experience, right? So, I mean, how do you know what it's like to drive unless you've driven a car? So, what I'm going to show you are slides of various scenes in Toronto, various projects I've worked on, and I'll try and give you little anecdotes about what they're like. And in fact, it's very much, I suppose, like the walking tour I do when Jim and the gang come up every year. And this will be, I understand, your 5th year, I think. So Jim and I have known each other for 5th year. We're now on first name. I can call him Jim now, apparently for the first time. And that's what we'll do tonight. So if you get bored, just say, hey, I'm bored. Can you do something funny? And I have some funny noses and stuff to put on, and we can do that a little later on. So what I'll do is just walk you briefly through the process of what we do in Toronto. Keep in mind that in Toronto, things are incredibly regulated. To do anything in Toronto takes you a minimum of 8 months, okay? 8 months to do any sort of development. If you want a rezoning, a zoning change, it takes over a year. Okay, and then if somebody appeals you, it takes another year to get that done. So it can take a minimum of 2 years sometimes, depending on what you do. Because Toronto has a planning staff of over 200 people. We get involved in everything, from how your building relates to the street, to how tall it is, what it's used for. Everything is regulated in Toronto. So, I'm supposed to say, Bob, kill the lights. I feel like Arsenio Hall. And switch outside, Bob. Okay. Toronto once looked like this. Not recently, but it once looked like this. And through that beautiful planning process, we now have the world's largest rectal thermometer. Okay? This is the beautiful CN Tower named after Canadian National Railways. They no longer own it. It is the tallest freestanding structure in the world. And in fact, that little, you see where the white part starts? That's the tallest observation deck in the world. It's about a quarter of a mile up. There's a restaurant there if you want to eat, and it costs you about $10 to get up to the top. If you're in Toronto next week and you want to go just around 6:30, 7 o'clock so you can see the city at daylight, then you can see it at night, because it really is quite dramatic at night. So that's the CN Tower. Toronto is also a city of contrast. In this sense, I'm showing you a picture of University Avenue. This street was originally laid out so the guy who had his house on it could see the lake. Okay? Now, if that guy's there today, he's in big trouble. And he's not sleeping well because there's a lot of cars coming down this road. But that that street is so wide. Now, Toronto is a city, a nice city, but it's more by fluke than by planning, okay? So sometime back in, 1800, when the governor of the area gave out all this land to his buddies, he made the roads wide, and they just happened to stay that way. All streets in Toronto are paved with gold, so are the buildings. That building is filled with gold. It doesn't show up too well because this is 400 ASA film on the right day, but those windows are covered in gold film as an energy conservation measure. So we like to do things big. This is Oz, okay? And that's what it looks like today. Again, we see the rectal thermometer, and beside it the toilet. Off of them, the Sky Dome, or the world's only retractable roof, because Montreal's stadium has just fallen apart recently and the roof is torn. So, Toronto's constantly in competition with Montreal. So that's the Sky Dome, and that roof, if you happen to be there next week at the Blue Jays game, swings open when it rains. Oh, sorry, no, when it rains, we close it, right? And it's in 3 sections, and nobody can see me, but it just kind of comes out like an Oreo cookie. It kind of swings into place. Now, if you're going to the game next week and you can't get tickets, go into the Hard Rock Cafe there. The manager's name is Glenn. He's a friend of mine. Tell him we canoed across Lake Ontario together. It's Rollin. Can you have a seat? Now, he'll give you a seat for about 20 bucks, but 15 of that goes towards the cost of your drinks and your food, so you get to see the game for 5 bucks. Now, I was just to dinner with the faculty members. You should have come because they paid. And I told them that there's the largest indoor screen in this place. It's about 200 feet long, 50 feet high. And there's a hotel in this building. So if you get a hotel room at 99 bucks a pop, you get to watch the game because they can hit a home run into your room. Well, they also take pan shots of the crowd. When one good baseball game, keep in mind that Toronto sets all attendance records for baseball games in North America. So there's about 52,000 people there. And the camera was scanning the hotel room. Well, there was a couple having sex against the window. And in fact, it came out on this 200-foot street. Now, can you imagine if you were being cheating on your spouse? You're in the game and said, hey, I know that guy. So now when you go in there, there's a statement on the windows that says any sort of that activity can result in legal action. But anyway, what you see here is downtown Toronto, okay? And as you see, you get up way out in the distance to get flat like any good city does, and it's built up in the central area. Now, if you see that little building down, see that long white thing and that little building with the green roof? That used to be the tallest building in the Commonwealth. Does anybody know what the Commonwealth is? Jim does. But Jim doesn't count. He's a faculty member. Anybody? You know all the countries that England used to govern, India and all these places, they're all members of the Commonwealth. Well, that actually used to be the tallest building in the Commonwealth, I think in about the 1940s or something, or 30s. And now, of course, it's not the tallest anymore. So, getting a little closer, we see tall buildings in downtown Toronto, Scotia Plaza, the big red one there in the middle. All these buildings, that's basically what it looks now. But you can see how dramatic it changes about 3 streets away. So there's a central area focused on the subway system. This is what downtown Toronto looked like in 1952. Again, you see the Royal York Hotel, which at that time had been surpassed by the old bank in Nova Scotia. Now you see the building on the right? That's been replaced with the tallest building, or what appears to be the tallest building in the middle. When in fact, the white building on the right is the tallest building in the city, but it's just an optical illusion. So the new bank incorporates that old bank. And in fact, we're very nice people in Toronto. If you keep historic buildings, we won't count the floor area of them, and we'll let you build bigger buildings. Now keep in mind this building here at the left, okay? We're going to show that a little later. Okay, this isn't working again. Oh, there we go. Now, this is what it looked like in about 1970. We had seen bank buildings. Banks were in competition to build the biggest buildings. We have a couple of black ones coming up the middle. Very architecturally. And in fact, they're continuing this architectural practice of being bled. As you'll see in a bit, when the Toronto Dominion Bank builds all these black buildings, we'll build a new one within the last 2 years. We'll show you a slide of it. So in the early 1980s, it starts to get a little denser. The rectal thermometer is erected, a couple of other things. Now, here we see the port area. Toronto is in Lake Ontario. Unfortunately, it's dying as a port area because everything's getting off of Montreal. Now, Toronto is also a system of parks. You can, in fact, run across the city for about, 60 miles and never leave a park. I'd never get that far. I'd collapse, but you can do that. So there are lots of trees, lots of parks, and the most striking feature that people find when they come to Toronto is, geez, I didn't know there were so many trees. Well, there are lots of trees. There are lots of parks. There's lots of open space for people to go to. We have neighborhood parks, or little intimate parks for individual developments. This is a condominium project down by the waterfront called St. Lawrence Square. Those condos there on the left are about 1 bedroom, maybe 800 to 1,100 square feet. And when they were developed a few years ago, they probably sold for about $325,000. So we created hard for people to sit around. What else would you do there? Skydome. We have baseball parks, as well as other parks. So when you go to the gate next week, there it is, okay? There's a retractable roof. You go up there, there'll be all kinds of scalpers hanging around. Who needs tickets? Who needs tickets? So that they don't get arrested, they will always be saying, who's selling tickets? That means he's selling tickets. Okay, so you approach the guy who's saying, who's selling tickets, and ask him if he has tickets. Get early, you're going to pay a lot of money. You pay $100 for a pair if you wait till just before the game time. So we have neighborhood parks, we have baseball parks, and we have a lot of neighborhoods. Okay, this is just around the corner from where I live, which happens to be the East Indian neighborhood of Toronto. So if you want East Indian food, you go to Coxwell and Gerrard. If you want Greek food, you go to the Danforth. Toronto has the largest Italian community outside of Italy. So there's a lot of Italian restaurants. Any kind of food you want, you can get it in Toronto. So if you're on that trip next week, determine what you want, go out every night to a different restaurant. See me later, or next week I'll tell you where you can go to get whatever kind of food you want. So we have a lot of areas that are very ethnically diverse, and in fact, the immigrant population tends to locate in those areas. Yorkville, a different type of retail area. Toronto's Rodeo Drive. Aren't these beautiful buildings? Well, these suckers are coming down. Okay? People think they're historic? That's ceramic brick. I have a proposal for this site for a deconstructivism building. I don't know if you know what that is. Nothing straight. And they want to rip all these buildings down. I had the public meeting, it got violent. The ratepayers and the business people in the area said, no, this is Yorkville, this is Yorkville. And I'm saying, look across the street, there's an above-grade parking garage. These buildings aren't even historic. As a planner, I can't regulate architecture, so if somebody wants to come down and tear these suckers down, if they're not historic, bring in the bulldozers, and they're out of here. So I have a development proposal for this site, and at the public meeting, as I said, it got violent. I had people who lived way out in the suburbs, moved down into the downtown area of the city, and are complaining about traffic. So they said to me, if you allow this building here, we're going to have lots of cars. I said, well, wait a minute, there's lots of cars here anyway. But I can't stand up in front of the meeting and tell this guy to go to hell. You know, look, pal, you moved here, put up with it. You know, I want to tell him that. And the cars were there when he moved in, but you can't say that to him. So what do you say? You say, look, the amount of commercial floor area there, you're going to put in less. There's going to be less cars. But this doesn't sell it to these people. And you have a problem dealing with them. Now they want a traffic study for the whole area to stop all development. I say, no, I can't do that. If I do that, all these people will take me to court. But people won't listen to this sort of thing. People won't listen to reason, and especially people who've paid a lot of money for their property. Okay? Oh, my backwards. Then we have the Eaton Center, a different level of retail. Many of you have been to Toronto, been to the beautiful Eaton Center, constructed in the late 70s. I actually work in the building on the left, but not much longer. They're kicking me out. And the Eaton Center goes from that tower. Now the one in the middle is a new tower, and there's another tower. The inside of the, see this lovely little park here? Well, when this project was approved in 1978, it was approved in stages. There's going to be a 45-story office tower there. And when the people see it in Toronto, they're going to have a heart attack. Well, that's what the inside of this place looks like. You'll notice the dancing girls on the platform. Well, I gave a lecture here recently, and they usually travel with me, but the school wouldn't kick in for their airfare, so they're not here. But the Eaton Center is a nice place to shop. You'll like your American dollars, but it's expensive. But the problem with the Eaton Center is everything's internalized. So when it was built, it killed the other side of Yonge Street 10 years ago, and it's only starting to recover. So one thing as planners you should think about, at least in the city of Toronto, is how do these buildings relate to streets? And you want things to happen in streets so that people can see activity. So what we try to do is encourage retail use as a grade, fronting onto the street so that there's something happening there and it doesn't look dead. And as nice as the Eaton Center may be on the inside, it's a bit of a dud on the outside. And then Toronto is also a city of neighborhoods. A nice, lovely residential street, which is in fact just around the corner from this street. I took this picture facing that way. When I look straight towards Jim, I see this beautiful residential neighborhood. Hazelton Avenue. See this house being sold by Johnson and Daniel? That house goes for $1.2 million. That house is about 1,300 square feet. But because the three keys in real estate are get as much money as you can, get as much money as you can, get as much money as you can, this property goes for a lot of money, primarily because of its location. So anybody who's anybody happens to live on Hazelton Avenue. And these are the people who get violent at the public meetings when I tell them there's maybe a truck going down the road once a week. The neighborhoods are very diverse. We have a house on the left, we have a house on the right. As much as I would have liked the house on the right to look like the house on the left, I have no determining factors over architecture. I can't tell somebody it has to look like something. But demography on that level, you can't do that. Toronto is also an area of high-density residential development. St. Jamestown, built in the 1960s, a tower in the park. There was this planning concept, you put a lot of people in a narrow tower and a lot of open space on the outside, this will work real nice. Well, this is a dog's breakfast. Crime here is rampant. You're not safe in the underground garages, and it's been a real failure, actually. It provided needed affordable housing, but it's a real failure as a planning exercise. Now, planning occurs on different levels. Many of you living in a beautiful town of Muncie, Indiana, with such a vibrant downtown, are wondering what strategic planning is. And I understand I'm with Francis tomorrow, and he's been talking about strategic planning. Many of you, I understand, are going into counties and coming up with these plans about how development should occur. Well, Toronto, there's the city of Toronto proper, and then there's a metropolitan area. Toronto alone has very little undeveloped land. In fact, we only get 30 to 90 new houses a year. What really happens is condominiums, which we'll see in a minute. But there are those areas of Toronto where, while you're doing strategic plan means a whole huge county, strategic plan to me means what you see in the slide. Everything covered under that white terminal. And when you arrive in Toronto next week, that's where you're arriving, at beautiful Union Station. You'll see the gold building inside there with the gold in it. Try and scrape some off, bring it home, melt it down. Strategic planning for me, or for some people in the city of Toronto, are that lens. It's called the railway lens. That's what it looks like today from the CN Tower. That's what it's going to look like 30 years from now. And in fact, that's an earlier proposal for the Dome Stadium. It is going to be intense. And there's been a tremendous backlash by ratepayers, people who live in the city, in the metropolitan area, against this sort of development occurring on land that was given to the city by the federal government for a park. Well, that's a really nice park. And there's a tremendous amount of development that's going on in this area. So in a metropolitan area or a city of Toronto, you're doing strategic plans for very small areas, but at the same time, you're doing planning for specific developments. And in fact, here we see a slide that's produced off the intergraft of the Dome Stadium and the surrounding development, where we were trying to assess the shadow impacts of those pink buildings. Okay, not my favorite color. But this is an example of where we do a plan for a certain area. Bay Street. Now here's another example of planning occurring in terms of a micro area, not the more grand urban scale. The most concentrated form of development is in the downtown area, which you see at the end of this slide. This is the south end of Bay Street. In fact, you'll be going to City Hall, which is just kind of that curved building over to the left. You just see the back of it. This is the south end of Bay Street. This is the north end of Bay Street, looking south again. So what we have is high development at both ends. And as developers have accumulated land in this area, they want that density to clear all the way down. I apologize, I took this slide just after a small nuclear explosion. And they want development to occur. Now, many of you who were on the trip last year stood in front of this building, in front of that beautiful little urban park with the water in it. And I commented on what a lovely park this was. Now, having said that, I've been back 4 times, and it's actually not that bad. But anyway, we see this high-rise development at about 12 times coverage occurring, progressing from both ends. So there's this tremendous development pressure by developers who buy a site and say, hey, what's next door? I should have it here. And in the past, we've been allowing this sort of thing to occur. But in this 2-block area, we've probably introduced maybe 15,000 new people. There's been no addition to the schools. Okay, there's been no addition to the transit system. And we have to start thinking about what impact does this have on the services that the taxpayers have to provide, and should the taxpayers be providing it, or should the developers be provided? And that's something we're going through now. But one thing I want you to look at in these developments is the spatial relationships between buildings. Now, for me in Toronto, in an urban area, the key planning words are light, view, and privacy. Okay? When I look at a development every day, I assess it on the terms of what does it do in terms of light, view, and privacy. Now, having said that, you have no protection in law to light, view, or privacy. So when I'm telling somebody, hey, you're blocking their view, they can turn around and say, well, they don't have a right to view. Well, you're right, but I'd like them to have a view anyway. So we deal with these things. So here we see a residential condominium building built at 12 times coverage. I think there's 525 units in this building. They sold in 1987 for about $150,000 to $200,000 each. Their average size is about 750 to 850 square feet. And if you were so lucky as to get a unit on the north end of this building, you would be approximately 20 feet from a government office building. So when you're brushing your teeth in the morning, there's 20 other people brushing their teeth with you in the opposing building. But this was acceptable planning in an urban area. And one of the reasons it was acceptable, if you look along at the back, you see those little houses? That's what they look like. Now, I go through a lot for you people. I stood in a raging inferno to take this picture. And I ruined 2 suits and a good pair of shoes, I'll have you know. But what we see is a 25-story building, the one I just showed you, next door to 3-story townhouses. And I had another good picture of them, but they got wiped out in that nuclear explosion I was just talking about. But you can see that they have small balconies, and those are stacked townhouses. So the only open space those people have is the balconies, and if you happen to be fortunate enough at grade, you've got the backyard. But that's considered appropriate in an urban area. You don't see this in Muncie. Okay, and in fact, I was a little surprised we didn't see more townhouses in Muncie, but then I realized what land goes for. I could sell my house in Toronto and come down here and buy 250,000 acres of land. And I'm not a rich man. I drive a minivan. But in Toronto, land is so expensive, this is what happens. So you see this little enclave of residential units, which we'll take a walk on next week, surrounded by all these tall buildings. Now, one of the other issues we're dealing with in Toronto is the conversion of industrial land. This small building you see at the front was in fact a manufacturing plant 20 years ago. Today, there's a tremendous pressure to create office or convert that into residential condominiums, loft apartments, very expensive. Well, we want to have jobs in Toronto for a tax base, because the tax base, if it's just residential, isn't that great. And we're having a tremendous trouble fighting the pressures for conversion of industrial lands, especially when it's that close to the downtown area. Now, you remember that thing I showed you in the 1962 picture of this old decrepit warehouse on the waterfront? One of the other things we do in Toronto, because there's no new land, and you can't create new land in a city that's defined by its boundaries, we rehab buildings. So this used to be a warehouse where the ships used to come in and unload goods from Europe. Today, it's a condominium. You see those suckers on the top? Those babies, when this sucker was opened in about 1982, sold for $1.5 million. And inside, there's a large retail shopping area and a glassed area. Jim probably takes you down there. It's kind of nice to go through, actually. It's really a nice development, but it's very expensive. Then you see a new phenomenon, and I understand Muncie did this recently by selling off a piece of land for about how much, Jim? We talked about that today. Not much. Okay, not much. Well, here we see one of the entrances into the University of Toronto, which is located in downtown Toronto, and they got a lot of land. In fact, they happen to own this piece of land. Now, this piece of land is opposite of all those high-rise condos I just showed you. Well, the university, like any good university, needs money. So what they've decided to do is lease the development rights of this land. Now, I can't remember the specific figure, but for that tennis court and parking lot, they're getting $20, $30 million over a 150-year lease or something along those lines. Now, in return, the developer wants to build what was on the other side of the street. Now, you as students who play tennis there want to keep your tennis courts. So you're objecting to this development because you want the tennis courts. The university, on the other hand, wants the money. Then we have the historic church in the middle, where the priests happen to reside, and they don't want the wing torn down because that's where they sleep. So there's a whole bunch of issues now where all these institutions want to generate cash by selling land. Now, on that same tune, here we see City Hall. City Hall is apparently at about 1 times coverage. It's zoned for 12. So we've had developers come in and say, hey, you're not using this space, give it to us for a good buck. And then there's those city councils think, hey, we could make a lot of money selling the development rights off that land. And this is an issue we have to deal with. And just so you know, the largest underground parking lot in North America happens to be under that swimming pool, which is a skating rink in the summer or the wintertime. So, up in Yorkville, we're going to walk by this building. I had a developer come in. He wanted to pick this building up and move it because he wanted the land. And he was going to move it about 10 feet. See, and he thought it was economically viable to pick that building up, which is brick and historic, and move it 10 feet to accommodate his development. Now, I mentioned in the classes today that this happens to be on the block that was bought in about 1960 by a German fellow who happened to be in Toronto once and bought the land. He hasn't been back since. Lives in a big castle in the Rhine, has a 10-car garage, and is nuts. He's nuts because he signed a development lease on this property for 165, 185 years. You know how a lease works? You sign a lease, people build buildings there. After 185 years, you get the land and the buildings back. Because he figured he'd be around in 185 years to have those buildings. Anybody who thinks that's a little crack. But anyway, this involves that site, and the developer who put the lease on the land wanted to move that building. Anyway, he's gone bankrupt. Now, today we talked about historical buildings earlier in the classes today. Here's a classic example of facadism. This is the old Toronto Stock Exchange. What they did was they erased that facade, ripped down the rest of it, and incorporated that new ugly black building. Remember earlier I showed you the Toronto bank buildings are so ugly and black? Well, there's a new one. And what they've done is they've integrated that facade into the building, and we give them floor area exemptions for it. And don't underestimate this. When I say we give them a floor area exemption, we're talking millions upon millions of dollars. Because that's what it means for them to get a bigger building at that location in downtown Toronto. Big bucks. Now, on the same subject of historical preservation, all these buildings are historic along the street. The tall building you see behind you, Bell Canada Enterprises, they also got density exemptions for that building. In fact, that's what it looks like. It's not very attractive. There's two towers like this. You'll see when you're there next week. We get things like public art for these people. This nice little park here and this little infrastructure. We give them density bonuses for that too. That's probably worth about a couple of $1 million. And then there's Scotia Plaza, which I actually happen to like this building. But you see this building in the front? Remember, in Toronto, we regulate the amount of floor area you have. We didn't count any of that building in the front because it's historic. And they got to take all that floor area and throw it into that tower. That tower was supposed to be at about 12 times coverage, and I think it's around 17. In exchange, the developer gave us $2 million worth of benefits, which about 4 years ago was peanuts, because since that time, I had a 20-story condominium built, where I got $2 million out of the guy. So in Toronto, we have the authority under law to extract benefits, and we assess values of those benefits. And what we do is, we determine the value of the increased density to the developer on a square foot basis, and we want half of it. So if the increase in value by getting a rezoning to this guy is $30 million, we want $15 million. And we do that. We get it in terms of land, cash, daycare, parking spaces. What's it cost to rent a parking space in downtown Toronto? About $40,000. So if we're doing a social housing project, we get him to build it, we assess values of all these things, we work it out mathematically, and we get it from him. Now, some of the stuff's a little iffy whether we do it or not, but we do anyway. So that's what Scotia Plaza looks like. I mean, how do you tell a guy you can't have that building when next door you have another 55-story building? I mean, it's pretty hard to say no. So what do? You try and get out of them what you can. Now, keep in mind, in any negotiation, what's the objective? Anybody. Is Matt in the crowd? We talked about this with Gary yesterday. Matt, what's the objective of a negotiation? To win. Put the truth to those people. Okay? Don't be fair. Don't tell them what you're doing. Don't show your hand. Win. As a public servant like I am, my idea is to get the best deal I can for the city and the people who live there. If I can extract every pound of sweat out of that developer, I can do it. And if he's willing to do it, fine, let's do it. Let's play ball. So what you try and do is get as much as you can in any negotiation. Push them to the point where they will say no. You have to know when they're going to say no, and you stop and you go with that, if it happens to work for you. One of the other issues in Toronto is we try and rehab old historic buildings. That's the St. Lawrence Market. If you happen to be there on a Saturday, there would be thousands of people down there buying the groceries. So the government rehabs their own buildings to generate cash. Old City Hall, the Eaton Center that we saw a little earlier, in 1968, City Council almost sold that building to be torn down and turned into the Eaton Center. But today it's still there. Oops. So one of the things we try and do is preserve old buildings and the views to old buildings, such as this. Now, we didn't do a good job, because if you were on the other side of that glass building, you couldn't see it. But now we are trying to preserve views. For example, from the other buildings. There's a little drunk when I took this picture. Or looking up Bay Street. You see this lovely clock tower. It's all lit up good nights. Got nice Christmas lights out at Christmas time, and people get to see it. So that's an important feature. Historic buildings and views. There's another clock tower in a recent development just beside Jaguar and Mercedes-Benz. We're going to be walking up here next week. A termination to a street with something scenic at the end of it besides the Mercedes-Benz symbol. The Flatiron Building, Goodman and Morris. A lovely building, well preserved with that monstrosity in the back. And we, like everybody in Muncie, encourage them. Oh, help me out here. Oh, I'm in front of the speaker, okay. So, what we try and do in blank walls is make them look pretty, right? Here's a couple of the people I work with. Now, affordable housing. I understand you had somebody here who talked about affordable housing. Okay, well, there's a development in downtown Toronto, just south of Eaton Center Tower. You see there on the left. And in exchange for allowing that development to go way above what they were supposed to be, that developer turned around and bought the Sears warehouse. In 10 years, that comes to the city, and we're going to turn it into affordable housing. Well, I'll tell you, I want to be poor in 10 years, because the ceilings in that sucker are 12 feet high. This is going to be the most palatial, affordable housing I've ever seen in my life. But that was the benefit the city extracted from the developer in exchange for developing. The That site cost, I think, $17 or $19 million. And that was a benefit to the city, or one of them, plus they gave us some daycare. Now, other issues. People who were on the tour last year, maybe some of the other years, might recognize this area, infill housing. Well, here's an example where we used infill housing to stop prostitution. How do we do that? We built these houses and allowed them to go inside. I'm just kidding. This is Earl Street, okay? Let me just slip through here. Take a look at this infill development. You walk up from the street, and behind the houses you see more houses, which used to be on a laneway. On that laneway, every day were dozens, maybe hundreds of prostitutes plying their trade. Now the people who lived in these buildings couldn't go out and get in their cars without being into some sort of difficulty because the laneway was being used for these purposes. Now that's Earl Street. Now ignore those bollards for a minute. To have successful prostitution, for any budding pimps in the crowd, to have successful prostitution, you have to have circular motion. Okay? Now I'm not talking about the physical act, I'm talking about cars. You have to have cars that can circulate. How many women of here have walked into a store and bought the dress at the first look? Anybody? No, you walk away thinking, yeah, I'm gonna go down to the next store and see what it's like down there. Well, that's in fact what the men do. Because all these residents had these beautiful townhouses, and they erected these gorgeous wrought iron fences, and it was like going to Kmart. Who's been to Amsterdam? Boy, you guys travel a lot. It's like going to Amsterdam. The women would, and I'm not trying to be sexist or anything, this happens to be the track 1 area of Toronto where the women are. If you want, I can show you where the track 2 area where the men are. They just don't mingle, okay? It's bad for business. The women would line up against this railing. Now this is a residential neighborhood. People have kids here. There's public schools on the other side of the street. They would line up, there might be 50, 100, right there. 12,500 cars a day went down this street. And this street goes nowhere. They would circle the block and come back around. So what do we do? Well, at the end of the street, we put in a no right turn sign. Well, what happened? The doctors coming down from the ritzy area of town to get into the parking lot for the hospital on the right complained that they couldn't turn right. Also, there's a gas station at the corner owned by Imperial Oil, and the potential clients would just drive across the gas station. And unless there was a police car there, we couldn't enforce it. So we asked Imperial Oil, could you please chain this lot at night? No, we can't. Why? Because there's an insurance problem if somebody drives into the chain. So, what do you do? Well, we thought about it. And the problem got worse. In fact, if the clients were walking, they would pick up the prostitutes, go up an alleyway into the parking lot just behind here, and go into the underground stairwells and ply their trade. And in fact, a couple of years ago, before we put in these bollards, you could take one step down into the stairway with a shovel and shovel off the condoms and needles. It was horrible. And remember, I said there's 2 public schools here. Kids like in kindergarten to grade 6. The teachers would have to go into the schoolyard and pick up the needles and the condoms so the kids didn't get disease or stick a needle in their arm and play a doctor. We also had another problem in the sense that it was a busy street in these schools. The school wanted a bus lay-by so the bus could pull over, but we ran into the same problem. If we put in a lay-by, after hours, all the people will stand there. It'll be like a shopping area for prostitutes. So we couldn't do these things. So what did we do? Well, we thought of closing off the street. Well, the Public Works Department job is to keep streets open, so they fought us every step of the way. Now, one thing to remember as planners is get your way. How do you get your way? Use the informal structure of an organization. Forget those flowcharts. Okay? That's for, it's going to take a long time to think that way. Go around those flowcharts and structure and get things the way you want them. So what did I do? I got the residents on side. I went to the local alderman and said, hey, the Commissioner of Public Works is sniffing glue. Let's stop this. So I got that alderman to put forward this motion before council to close the street. Everybody voted for it. And I overruled the Commissioner of Public Works. That happens to be very proud of that. And we got these bollards. And guess what happened? The prostitutes went away. They're no longer here. They're in somebody else's planning area, and I don't give a damn. Now, one little note to add to this is just up this street. Again, all the cars circulating. Talk about clash of the titans. We erected the AIDS hospice. This is where we take the people with AIDS from beyond hospital care. They were located along with Moberly House. Moberly House is where we try and convert teenage prostitutes. Both those facilities were on the busiest prostitution care area corner in the city. I mean, that's like taking an alcoholic We walked by this building last year, but it was under construction. What we see is an old brick building at the front, which was historic. The inside wasn't worth much. So this developer came in, and I worked with him to come up with a building that would result in many things. One, the preservation of the historic building. Two, in Toronto, we're big on sunlight. Everybody likes sun. And in fact, we're in the process of designating every street in the downtown area as a 3, 4, or 5-hour window street. Meaning, if it's a 3-hour street, you must have 3 hours of uninterrupted sunlight during the day on that street. So what we did is we got the developer to step the building back. So this is an office building on the lower floors with condominiums up top. Okay? Now this guy happened to be lucky to get this building on the market just before the market crashed about 2 years ago, and he sold it all. Now, keep in mind that some of the students found out today that the Public Works Department requires trucks to go in a forward motion on a site, turn around, and come out forward. That requires a lot of land. And this is a small site. And that's their loading area around the corner. And in fact, we solve that problem. Many people in Toronto can't solve that problem. So what do? They build elevators. You take a huge garbage truck, you drive it onto an elevator, it drops down, spins around, the truck backs up, dumps out, drives in the elevator, comes up, and drives up. Costs a lot of money. But because land is so expensive in Toronto and there's not much of it, the sites are getting smaller, as we'll see in a few minutes. And this is the only solution for developers who want to build. So what do? They very thankfully pass the cost of those elevators on to the people who live in the building. The condos in this building went for about $750,000. Now, when this went up, all the medical people in the building to the left objected because there were medical offices being put in that building. But they didn't say that's why they were objecting, but that's why they were objecting, and they lost. The other thing is, when you drive across the Don Valley Parkway, which is a huge park here in Toronto, when you look, where is that building? It doesn't stand out because it's massed into the building that already exists behind it. So when we're thinking of views, we're thinking of ways of protecting views, because all those doctors I talked about who bitched about the prostitutes, well, they live that way. And when they drive south, they can't see that building until they're right upon it. So these are the sorts of things I think about when I'm telling a developer how to mass his building. Keep in mind, I can't dictate architecture, but I can tell him how he masses it. Here's a good one. Budget realty. I talked about this in the class today. There's an apartment building to the north, and you can see the condominium units on the corner. Budget Realty came in, they wanted to build an apartment or a condominium, 11 floors high, 10 units, 1 unit per floor, with the top unit being 2 floors, with about 4,500 square feet of space, 4 bathrooms, and a maid's quarter, and a separate elevator for every unit. Those babies would be up in the $1.5 million range. So this guy came in, we had just lowered the height limit from 150 feet to 100, 2 months before. He wanted to build it to 130. I said, look, give me a break here. At the 100-foot mark, taper the top of your building so that the gun still have age. And he said, nah, he's not. What is the board? The board, that development should proceed. And I had to sit there and make stuff up. But in the meantime, we lost the hearing, but we won because I got the drawings I wanted 7 months earlier, and he was the big loser. Now, this brings me to another point, which I mentioned earlier. The object of oratory is not truth. I just didn't say everything. So as a holder of information, you manipulate what you want people to hear. And depending on how badly you want something, you disseminate what information you want them to hear. So for example, I said that here we have design guidelines, which we do. Above certain heights, you have to taper your building. Well, the design guideline I was referring to didn't apply to this site. It applied to the site 2 lots over. And I had the document in front of me, and on one side it showed the guideline, and I said, well, these guidelines are maybe applicable to the site. The key word here is may. They weren't, geographically speaking, but the lawyer never picked that up. All he had to do was look at the other side of the page and see it didn't, and question on it. He didn't pick it up. And I used that to my advantage. So, in any sort of thing that you happen to be doing as a professional planner, you hold the information. And by holding the information, you can dictate to some extent what happens. So how do you do that? You get people on side. You phone them before a public meeting and say, hey, you know, this developer's coming, he wants a pretty tall building, I don't think you're gonna like it. So when he shows up at the public meeting, he stands and says, I don't like this building, it's too tall. And he repeats what you told him on the phone earlier today. So somebody hears it and says, what do you mean it's tall? Is that tall? Yeah, well, I don't like it either. The next thing you know, everybody says it's the domino effect. And you get the whole public meeting on your side, so that when you report to council, say, hey, the public meeting was overwhelmingly in my favor. They don't want this development. So, the key to being successful is information. Use it to your advantage. The Nag's Head. We did this as a design exercise in the studios today. Now, what I was telling you, the sites are getting smaller. This site is 9 meters wide. Anybody know how long 9 meters is? About 30 feet. Yeah, about 30 feet. This building is 37 stories tall. It's at 37 times coverage. No, 33 times coverage. Okay? The parking occurs at 3 levels below ground, 3 levels above ground by way of a car elevator. The cars go up in an elevator, drive off onto a moving platform that slides them across the building, and they back off it. 2 units per floor. There's no windows on either side of the building, except for bathroom windows, because of the Ontario Building Code. If you have a building on a lot line, you have to have protected openings. And for a building this size, because of structural difficulties, you can't provide windows. So the only access to the light is at the north end of the building and at the south end. These are all artist renderings of what the site will look like. It's very, very tall. But I'm trying to encourage townhouse development. Okay? So I say, can you please put townhouses there with front yards where people can cut their grass? He says no for 6 months, but I got it. So we got townhouses with front yards where people will sit, provide a nice residential character to the street, because on the opposite side of the street is a senior care facility. I also wanted him to step the building back so that the shadow impact from this property on the golf course, the little putting green that the senior citizens have, is negligible. And he did it. It took 6 months to convince him, but every marketing brochure he now has shows this end of the building, because that's the best view. Now here's a beautiful street with a lovely parking garage on the left, which is falling apart. Now I knew that was going to be torn down eventually. In fact, I have a rezoning application to rip that baby down. On the other side, all those units where the loading's going to be, I got the developer to put in a nice entranceway, which he's building, you can't see yet, with front yards. And in fact, the developer now on the left side is going to do the same thing. And in 5 years, this will be a nice residential street. But I'm thinking ahead, kind of strategically for this street, but dealing with it as a reaction to an individual application. We also do a lot of computer modeling. I understand you're doing that. We did this for Confederation Life. That's it. This is a residential street. This is what you see at the end of it. I didn't do this one, thank God. This is an ugly building. And in fact, the residents had no idea how big this was going to be. I tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen to me. And in fact, the developer, when he brought all the models to the public meetings, they were 3 floors shorter than what they were supposed to be. But nobody took a ruler to figure that out. And this is another way I talk about mismanagement of information or using information to your advantage. The models were not actually reflective of what was being built. Now that this baby is built, the residents are up in arms saying, you didn't approve that. And in fact, this is what it looks like. It's pretty big, and that's right at the edge of a residential neighborhood. And you can see it popping up at the back. Now, having said that, let's look at the beautiful Selby Hotel. This is an historic building. And in fact, Ernest Hemingway, who used to write for the Toronto Star, lived in that room, just where you see where the arrow is. There's that gray slate kind of built section. That's where Ernie was, okay? And it's an historic building now. Now, to restore this building, we gave them a density exemption. They're doing a huge addition off the back. This is the best gay hotel in the city. Now, this is the street in front side. And we have a real problem because we have residential on the south side, commercial on the north side, and that big building that just shows you Confederation Life, this is their access. So all the residents, of course, are up in arms about this. We have a lot of these land use conflicts in Toronto. Development I have is almost an entire city block. Okay? Now, if you look at the beautiful little tree over where it says Avenue, it says number 90, 88, 86, 84. They don't have those properties. So their development actually goes around and fronts on the other street. Now, the sort of things I'm saying to these people is, I want your development on Yorkville Avenue to reflect the character of the street. Now, the confused situation is we have an historic building on the site. Now, before this was historic, the previous owner ran in with the bulldozers and started to tear it down until we said we can strike a deal with them. So we have half a building left. But the developer has to integrate that into his development. And he does it this way. It's that little thing by the blue umbrellas. And he creates this building behind. Now, you ever notice the architectural renderings, how everybody has legs like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? And these people could form a professional basketball team. Nobody looks like that. And why don't they ever show a decrepit Chevette on the street? But anyway, here's an artist rendering of what that street will look like. Okay? Now, the people in the area says, well, that doesn't look like fact, these are the buildings that are in the middle of the development that he doesn't have. I want him to create development on the street that reflect that scale, because that's the scale of the street. Okay? Not only that, but at the end of the street is this parking lot. I want him to create a structure at the end of the street that is so significant that I'm going to want to stand there and look at it. Because that's the termination of the street. And at the termination of that street, I want a significant view. Okay? Now when I say I'm talking about city council, now those are the documents I deal with. I don't want them to have split level entrances because in Toronto, we have to shovel those. People slip on them in the wintertime. But a developer wants those because now he has two access to the street and he can charge double the rents in the basement. But it's not a good urban design feature. Nothing's happening at the street except stairs, so I have to discourage them from doing that sort of thing. I want pedestrian connections for long blocks, just like this. And on these pedestrian connections, I encourage them to have retail. So people will use these and create these little European views in the middle of a long block. This is the backside of his development. That's what the street looks like today. This is what he wants it to look like. Well, I say, hey, that doesn't look like this. And in fact, all of these building materials are not reflected in this. So it becomes a subjective decision over what's nice, what's not. And you get in these battles. And we've been haggling over this for over a year now. I think I want the other slide projector now, Bob. How about a big round of applause for Bob, ladies and gentlemen? Bob. Woo, 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 woo.